You very much. Oh, I've got some echo. Hang on. I'm not sure if that's me. All right, that sounds better. Well, thank you very much, Budget Committee, for your time this afternoon as we work through the Clackamas 911 or Central Communication budget presentation. My department is a little bit unique because I do not draw any general fund expenses. My budget is made up of two primary revenue sources, one being the state 911 tax, which is on every cell phone line and landline and VoIP line, which is shared right now. That's a dollar tax that actually has increased as of January of 2020 from 75 cents to $1. So for unique, probably the only positive COVID story you may have heard today is that with everyone moving to the digital workplace, I could not be happier to be sitting on the cell phone tax right now because word is that there's quite an increase or at least a temporary spike in the use of cell phone and landlines as people begin to work from home during the COVID crisis. So you will see on my revenue side, if we start in the little green square, the state revenue is about 18% of my budget. We have some little local funding, which covers my contracts with the U.S. Forest Service for some radio coverage that occurs in our system, as well as reimbursements for two regional positions that work out of my office. My charge for services on the revenue side really is made up of user fees. I have 6 different law enforcement agencies, and I have 8 or 9 different fire agencies. Beginning in July of 2020, we'll be bringing on Aurora Fire, which will make up the 9th fire jurisdiction that we will provide dispatch for. And then we also have a number of county departments. There are about 7 small contracts that I have with various county departments to provide services for things like community corrections and juvenile and waymaster and the dog services program. And so there's a number of very small contracts that are included in that. You will also see an 18%, or the other category is for my public records requests. We do receive some revenue from public records requests. And then we also have a fund balance, which is reflected at 18% of my budget. This actually is a bit of an artificial inflation, and I know that there is a question about this that one of you had about why my fund balance is over $2 million. And the reason for that is that the capital reserve monies that we have been saving aside, that my member board has been saving over the last 5 or 6 years, got liquidated in the 2018-19 budget and showed up in my fund balance. So there is an artificial inflation of about $900,000 that is sitting inside my fund balance right now, which will move into the capital reserves account for technology replacement for the future. So 911 technology is very expensive. We have kind of the brains to our system is called computer aided dispatch, and the replacement of those systems runs between $3 to $10 million. So it takes us about 10 years worth of savings for us to be able to replace those systems every 10 years. And that is why we move any cost savings into that capital reserves account. You'll see a small amount for federal revenue, and that is for grant funding that we have for regional communication projects. We have 2 current projects underway. One is to share our CAD information with other 911 centers, and the second is to enhance cybersecurity related to the 911 program, 911 centers throughout the Portland metro area. So that is what the federal funding is on, a reimbursable grant program. On the expenditure side, you'll see that I'm about 67 to 68% personnel costs. That is for 53.75 full-time FTE positions, which is the bulk of my budget. I have materials and services around 4%. My cost allocations, which cover the county services as to the other county departments, at 4%. Our special payments expenditures is how we participate in regional technology initiatives. Both our CAD system, the brains of our system, and our CAD to CAD, which talks to the other 911 centers, both are the fiscal agent for those is in Washington County. So my special payments line supports those 2 projects and goes over to Washington County typically to reimburse those 2 projects that we participate in regionally. The capital line for me is very small. It's 0.18%, and it's about 20,000 that we put into that project, which is basically just seed funding if something breaks and if we need to replace it, to really start going through the supplemental process to move funds from either my contingency or my reserve account in order to replace a capital item. And there's my reserve and contingency at 14.51%, which is sort of the offset to what is in my fund balance. The additional 4% in that funds, between that and the fund balance, went to offset user fees this year, so that my user fees could remain at a flat 0%. It's actually 0.06% to my users, so that they didn't see a huge cost increase given some of the pressures on the local budgets that support ours. So that is my revenues and expenses. You'll see on kind of the basic summary side of the sheet, I can explain the significant changes in some of the percentages. You'll see across the board for our change in budget year for my revenues, it's about 3.7% increased, and that is simply because we'll see an increase in some of the state revenue this year for that increase in the cell phone tax. You will see on the personnel side, and I know this relates to a question that folks had, as to why there's a $515,000 change in my personnel line. And that is because we typically budget all of our positions in the 911 center at the top of the pay scale for all of the positions in our agency. And over the last 4 years, we've looked at historical data to see whether or not that trends, whether or not we have enough funding in that account to cover the personnel expenses. And one of the things we've noticed here at CCOM is that a lot of our staff, we have made a number of hires within the past couple of years. So a lot of our staff sit on the lower end of the pay scale and are not topped out currently in their positions. We also went through a Project Retain study, which evaluates turnover in our agency. And so there are usually 3 to 5 positions that turn over at CCOM, and they are it's a lengthy training process to come in. It takes about 18 months to become trained as a dispatcher here in our center. So we, looking at the historical data, decided to take some cuts off of the personnel line and not overfund that line. So we looked at historically what we spent, and this year we project to be only spending about $6.5 million, and we felt that we were pretty safe at going at the $7.5 million range and not the $8.4 million that was initially recommended if we carried all of the positions at the top of their pay scales. The other significant decrease you see is the 25.6% decrease in the materials costs, and that is because we had a special one-time project set aside for the 1920 fiscal year that ended up not coming to fruition, and so that money ended up going back into our reserves account, or it sits in the fund balance right now, but will move to the reserve account, and that's for the implementation of fire protocols. It was a project that our member board wanted to move forward on, but right now we have a lot of other projects going on with the digital radio upgrade, and so we decided that we didn't have the bandwidth to complete that project this year. The other significant increases you will see the special projects or special payments line goes up about 18.8%. And that is because in fiscal year 19 and 20, we have to replace the regional servers that support the CAD system across the 4 centers that we participate in. So that project is going to be approximately an additional $117,000, I think, for Clackamas County's contribution to that project. And then the final increase you'll see is the 1,067% increase in our reserve for future expenditures. And that reflects simply moving the savings back in from the fund balance to the reserve for future expenditures to replace we had about 990,000 in that line. And so we'll end up having 1.38 million that line for saving from 19 and for fiscal year 1920. So that kind of explains the revenue and expenses sheet for you. Our fund by department summary by fund, this really just kind of outlines the 5 basic programs that we have according to the MFR. We have the call taking program, the dispatch program, training and quality assurance, our tech services, and our administrative services. One of the questions that we had was how come the call taking program numbers were down about 500,000 over last year's. And that is because every brand new call taker or brand new staff in our center starts as a call taker, which means that they are initially billed to the call taking line. And in fiscal year 19 and 20, we had 13 trainees that went through our program. And they initially were reflected in budget year 1920 is in the call taking program. When they completed their training and moved into dispatch, their revenue follows them, or revenue and expenditures follows them into the dispatch side of our budget. So it's artificial. We didn't actually take money out of call taking, but it kind of transfers with them when the employee becomes a dispatcher. So what you're seeing in the budget numbers is simply the transfer of activity from call taking into our dispatch, which is kind of reflective of the what the MFR kind of requires us to do, because we are identifying how many full-time staff are in each of these areas, call taking versus dispatch. So it's not that I'm losing the funds there. It's just simply those funds will show up in the dispatch side of this budget for this next year. So the next thing I want to talk about is our performance Clackamas strategic results. So we have two basic results that sort of align with the board's priorities. One is ensuring the safe and healthy communities. And one of the big action steps that we took this past year was to really develop the call taking program. If you have been with the budget committee for a couple of years, Clackamas County has not had a call taking program for up until this last year. Last year was the first year that we actually were training people to get into the call taking program. We had one a number of years ago before I was director, and we ended up collapsing that program, and everyone became dispatchers for a period of a significant part of time. And the problem with that we found was that we were not able to retain employees because there was so much that they had to learn, and the stresses of making it through the training program were significant. And it also created some issues with regards to distraction for people taking 911 calls and answering radio traffic from our fire users. So our member board asked us to split the call taking function from the dispatch function to help improve the workload and help us to retain staff in the CCOM program. Staffing's been a historic problem for the last several decades in order to keep people in our staff. So we currently have 6 full-time trained call takers, and we have 3 more that are in training right now, which will give us a cadre of 9 call takers. And then we also have a number of dispatchers in the training program. We are at 25 right now with 4 supervisors and 2 additional. So we have 31 people that are certified to do dispatching right now. That is still under what the project retain study suggests that we should have for the call volume in Clackamas County. We should have an additional 12 positions. We are budgeted for an additional 3 right now. So we will be filling those coming up. We have a recruitment that will be launching in June, and so we will fill those 3 positions. But we will still be 9 positions short for what the call volume demands that we should be capable of having staff-wise. Now, I can't recommend that we increase staffing right now because we are also at some facility restrictions. So I am almost out of desks based on the number of staffing that we have right now. So this year's budget does not recommend any additional staff. It keeps our current staffing level at the present level it is right now. And we're undergoing a feasibility study to evaluate kind of what the facility alternatives might be into the future so that we can meet our staffing goals long term. Our second goal is making sure that 95% of our authorized positions are filled, and we met that target this year. We only have 4 people that are in training right now and 3 more coming on board. And our staff have really stepped up and really ensured that we kept the staff that we've had in the training program. Of the last 17 staff that have been hired at CCOM, we have only lost 2 who have self-selected to leave the training program on their own. So we've been able to retain the 15 of the last 17 trainees hired, which is incredible for the numbers. It was about 50% retention rate prior to that. In terms of our major accomplishments for this past year, we have done a number of things. Staffing and training and recruiting has been our #1 focus. I believe Commissioner Savas has been asking a number of the departments how many folks have been hired in the past year. And we hired 9 call-taking trainees and 1 EMS quality assurance coordinator. So we hired 10 people. We had about 16 fully open positions, I think, at the beginning of this year. We promoted 4 internally. And we also upgraded a temporary employee who'd been temporary with the county for 13 years into an actual 0.75 FTE position. So that is kind of our story on some of the staffing increases that have happened over this last year. We've also had a number of advanced certifications and certifications to become full-time call takers and dispatchers. We also completed that Project Retain study, which tells us how many staffing, what the appropriate staffing should be for both the call volume and the coverage that we are hoping to provide someday here in Clackamas County. We also conducted a couple of both user satisfaction surveys, which was the first one this past year, and an employee satisfaction survey, which has been our 10th actual employee satisfaction survey. So we continue to do those on an annual basis. We also developed a number of accountability processes this year. And so CCOM has really was lacking in a number of ways that it was tracking data throughout our program. So we now are able to track all of the inquiries. These are all the citizen complaints, the user complaints, anyone who calls 911 that has concerns with our service. We now have an inquiry process that ensures that that is assigned to a supervisor and followed up on and categorized in terms of its outcome. So we know whether or not it was a training issue or an accountability issue or a technical issue that was involved in the citizen's concern. We also developed a user help desk for technical issues. My technical team fields about 300 to 400 technical issues a month. And we now have a help desk system that's able to track really how much administrative burden that our various systems provide to them. We also implemented Guardian Tracker, which is an employee recognition program, which makes our feedback to employees transparent and able to give them both the kudos as well as the training information that they need right at the tips of their fingers, so they know whether or not we have concerns or appreciations coming to the department for actions in our system. We also completed our 5-year CGIS and our annual LEDS audit without any findings, which could not have been said of us 5 years ago. We actually failed our LEDS audit pretty substantially 5 years ago, and we passed it with clear findings this year. We also improved caller location accuracy, both through the Rapid SOS system and a call location query that allows us to now text people with certain types of cell phones. So we can it'll provide the lat and the long of particular locations, which has been helpful for some of the search and rescue calls we've had on Mount Hood and helped us already save lives. We've also improved our readiness to handle emergencies by ensuring that we have on-site food and shelter capability for our staff should they need to continue to work continuously for an emergency. We also, thanks to COVID, had to do a lot of work over the last couple of months to ensure that each of our workstations is now socially distanced. And so this really involved a lot of rewiring and moving some of our workstations to make sure that employees are able to work 6 feet apart from each other. If you've ever walked through the CCOM building, you know that we're pretty cramped in there like sardines. And so we've done a lot of work to make sure that we're capable of making sure our staff can be as safe as possible. We've also launched a quality improvement program and are working with the Denise Amber Lee Foundation in order to provide regular quality assurance of the calls that we accept at CCOM. Industry standard is that we are to provide 2% of call volume feedback, which is 2,800 calls a year for us. And so this is the first year that this program will be fully functional and allow us to give immediate feedback on a number of calls within just a day or two of taking them to our employees. We're also improving fire station alerting across the fire districts, and we're also replacing all the workstations inside CCOM. So if you wandered into our facility today, it kind of looks like ET with all of the zip walls up, and we're in the process of replacing furniture today. So our goals coming up over the next year involve real implementation of the quality assurance program, both for the EMS medical system and for our internal dispatch, and also making sure that we have a clear transition to the digital radio project, which will be a very significant project for Clackamas County. We also are bringing on Aurora Fire, as I mentioned before, on July 1st, and we'll be providing dispatch services to them here in Clackamas County as well. So those are kind of some of the key goals that we have. Our significant changes from 2019 and 20, we didn't really have any service level reductions because our member board actually provides the support beyond the 901 tax. So our law enforcement agencies bear 65% of the remaining funds that are not covered by the tax, and our fire agencies covered the remaining 35% of the liabilities in our budget. We did aim through discussions with our member board to keep our user fees at really a 0% increase this year. So we were able to do that because of the increase in the 901 tax from 75 cents to $1. That tax is set to increase again in January of 2021 to $1.25. So that would be able to help keep our revenues relatively stable and sustainable in the coming years. That's the first time the 901 tax has actually increased in over 20 years here in Oregon. Finally, we were able to keep all of our internal county services fees level as well. They're small contracts for the county departments and represent 0.03%. I think it's about $3,400 that each of them contribute for radio coverage should they need emergency services. So those are kind of the significant changes, and I think that is the end of our presentation. And I'm had several questions actually that folks asked, and so I think I've answered the substantial beginning balance over 2 million, being as that was simply reflects our capital reserves and money that will go back towards savings for some of our capital projects. The drop in the personnel costs in the CCOM summary, that was simply because we are not funding them at the full 100% and top of the pay scale. And our call taking program, the drop of $1 million in charges really is a transfer from call taking into dispatch because of where employees are in the system. And then the final question I think I had was from Mr. Feely with regards to the EMS program. And I answered him quite extensively in email this morning, but the EMS EMS Quality Assurance Coordinator that we had hoped to hire when I was in front of you last year went through several failed recruitments, and we are just now bringing that person on board June 1st. And that will be Bill Conway, who is the former chief of Clackamas Fire District 1, and he will be working with us as the EMS Quality Assurance Officer. I'll be really aiming to evaluate the whole medical system from the call dispatch to the medical transport. So I am hopeful that when I am here next year, you will have a year's worth of data with regards to how the system is performing. We do have the EMS Quality Assurance Committee, Quality Improvement Committee that meets monthly now. They do track CPR statistics as well as STEMI, which are also cardiac arrest incidents. And we've been looking at those case by case in Clackamas County, and the data right now that's reported to the CARES program has already, there's been a press release about the percentage that the Clackamas cardiac survival rate actually exceeds the Oregon State survival rate. So we have some of that limited data, but I know that Mr. Feely wants a little bit more from us next year. With that, I'm open to questions.
We have Mr. Feely.
That would be me. Thank you, Cheryl. And the question I asked last year was trying to get at what the total response time is, like say for a heart attack patient, from the moment they dial 911 till the EMT shows up at their doorstep. And CCOM tracks sort of the dispatch time right now, which is only a piece of the puzzle. But Cheryl did respond extensively to me privately today, and I appreciate that. And I'm glad you finally got the quality assurance person on board. Sounds like that will work out well, and I'd be happy to wait for my answer. I'm glad you're looking at facility because I have toured CCOM and it's small. That's what I can say about it. So thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Commissioner Savas.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Cheryl. I don't have a lot of questions related to the budget because you're not general fund supported, but I appreciate what you do. I did want to just kind of give a shout out, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. A lot of people don't realize that people that work in CCOM, that it takes a special ability and special skills, and not everyone can do that day in and day out. And it just takes a special kind of person. So I just want to acknowledge you and your workforce for all the great work you do. And again, thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel.
Ann Lee.
Okay. I have, so in your presentation, you mentioned the technology costs are very expensive, which I agree with you. And I noticed the capital expenditure is only 0.18, less than 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just curious where those, or maybe CCOM doesn't own those equipment or software and they are recorded under a different expense line item.
Sure. So the special payments to other governments is where we put out the significant costs related to our computer-aided dispatch system and our CAD to CAD. So we actually, it's about $600,000 a year that we put towards the maintenance and the support that we have on the CAD system, and it's about $200,000 that we put on the CAD to CAD project every year. So there's, I think it's about 900. I have to look at the numbers specifically, but on the expense side, in that special payments line is where you will see the technology costs related to that. We don't have any in the capital line itself right now because I don't have any specific capital projects other than the support for those two technologies. What will happen when we have a significant capital project, like if we were replacing CAD, we would go into that capital reserves line and get budget authority to spend that in the year that we're purchasing the CAD system. So we just replaced our CAD system in 2018. So I don't expect that we're going to be replacing it until about 2028. Probably 2030 really is probably the more realistic timeline because it takes multiple years to investigate and figure out what the CAD environment will be. So right now there's nothing, we only put 20,000 in that capital line just as if something breaks, we could initiate contract and then go for supplemental budget support from either a contingency or reserve line. So I have nothing planned that's outside of keeping the maintenance and support up on the CAD, the phone, and the maintenance, the CAD to CAD system.
Okay.
Good. Thank you. I do not see any other hands raised. So Cheryl, we want to thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to come and present to us, and just keep up the good work, and make sure there's somebody at the end of that 911 call. Right.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.